Starting in about 2014, and is Bart here today? Because you can blame him for starting this. Many years ago, what?
You hear him?
I do hear him all the time. So many years ago, Bart gave an amazing talk, but wouldn't share any technical IOCs for it. So the end of the argument was, well, fuck it, I'll go scan the internet myself and find it. And so I did. And I have basically been continually trying to do scanning of the internet for the past since 2014. And as I started going about it, trying to figure out how to do it, the technical needs and the backing of all of it, heard a legend. And it was that there was a security company that could do a full scan in 24 minutes. And I was like, this is crazy and awesome, and I want to be able to do it too. Because at the time, a scan took me about a week and a half is what I mainly would get. That's full entire IPv4 space. It's not just we sent a packet, but it's we verified the port was opened. We also then sent a follow-on request, whether it's like a GET request and pull the web page, things like that. So for years I was chasing this 24-minute mark that had been kind of like passed around. Oh, slides, thank you. Yeah, so I've been chasing this like 24-minute mark, and the truth is being like the speed of being able to do it is actually rather irrelevant because you just continue to throw more servers behind it. What makes it really useful and makes scanning really useful as a practice in terms of hunting is what you're scanning for. And the scanning that I've done over the years, which is mainly focused on malware, identifying malware control servers, it always is a consistent reminder of the limitations of my own creativity. But we're going to talk about a couple of the scanning things that I'm doing today, and yeah. So, yeah, you may know me also from your firewall logs. So, there's also a lot of great services out here that do this far better than I do, but takes much different approaches and support a much broader set of use cases than I. Census, Shodan, or you can build your own solution, which is what I've done. Conceptually, scanning is a fairly simple thing. It's I want to send a request to every single IPv4 address. So start at 11111 and go to 255, 255, 255, 255. So when going about scanning, one of the key pieces to it is understanding what the attack surface is of what you're looking for. So again, as malware control panels tend to be my focus, I think about, okay, if it's, say piece of malware like Cobalt Strike, what is it listening on? What ports does it have? What do the requests look like? And how can I elicit a response that will set this device or set this IP address as unique versus others in which I can identify what it is? So, when doing scanning, you're looking at a very flat view of the internet. If you send, say, get like a flat GET request, you get everything flat back. But index.php, index.html are things, and so things change as you scan. Not all devices are the same as well. So some web servers require user agents, some don't. So when thinking about things like Census and Shodan and custom solutions, diversity and multiple groups doing scanning and multiple approaches make all the difference as well. Additionally, when doing scanning, it's not like when I say I hit Twitter's IP space, I'm not getting people's profiles, I'm not getting those things. And even for something like an open web directory like this one, you're not getting anything beyond that first flat page, the first page, unless you therefore specify it. So we're not getting that. But instead, it also isn't as pretty, and you're not getting a full rendered web page. You're getting generally something programmatically accessible like a JSON object. So, moving into where this ties into a lot of cybercrime stuff. So funny enough as well, I started as an EPT researcher, and the thing is the veil between the two is not always as far as we think. And shout outs to Katie as well, because PureCrypt is also used for Whispergate. So, same. So I've spent a lot of time in the past year or two focusing on ransomware, and quite honestly, learning ransomware basically from the ground up and transitioning from doing the APT work. Move forward in my notes as well. So when looking at APT stuff, we tend to look at it as, this is the group, like a unit or something, and kind of work down from that. And the people underneath it change over time. But in the ransomware space, from what I've seen so far, the model of tracking it, like here's Lockbit and the things under it, is a bit broken, because the RASs themselves, things like Lockbit, Conti, while they may store the tradecraft and be like, here's intro tutorials to get yourself going, here's how to set up a Cobalt Strike, the RASs are more like three raccoons in a trench coat. They're not quite the, their strength and their power comes from their affiliates, comes from the people that are selling them access, selling them tools, and things like that. So the better kind of way that I've been thinking about it is like this, where it's the affiliates, the suppliers, the developers, and then the RAS is whatever, because they can always go somewhere else. And it isn't even as clean cut as this. And the espionage side, oftentimes a bit cleaner, but they tend to be broken out. Conti, for example, had multiple teams that would conduct the intrusions and all work through sort of a central spoke. But with these sort of broken out teams, they all have unique things that kind of set them apart sometimes. And they all have tools they use. So there's the people, and then there's Cobalt Strike, Brute Retell, and Redline, and all the things that they use in order to conduct their operations. So let's go hunting. So I love Cobalt Strike. Spent many, many years. I helped Raphael beta test it back in the day. And fun story, if you go back into the Metasploit commit history, you'll actually see a case where we overflowed Metasploit, and it's why we started using Armitage, which then became Cobalt Strike. So Cobalt Strike, to me, is one of the most important security tools in existence right now. And I'll say this as sort of a personal plea, not affiliated with anybody I work with, to help desk systems. Your customers are not just the pen testers, but the tradecraft that I learned and that others have learned as well over the years from tracking Cobalt Strike is incredibly important. And it applies then to other families that we want to go on to track. So the way I do a lot of the tracking of Cobalt Strike right now is actually through sending the request that an infected system would send to receive the full beacon payload. So the request is pretty simple. Fun note as well, I'm going to be changing my user agent to CyberWarCon after this talk, and I would like people to try and find my scanners. So as a fun CTF, catch me if you can. So sending this request is actually really fun, because what you get back from it when you blast it out across the world is you actually receive a full malware sample back, the actual full beacon payload. And as somebody who spent years subsiding off VirusTotal and thirst for that, I love getting something like this back, because I can also extract the raw configuration and get the individual details that the actors put into it and all of their unique configuration elements. So from looking at sort of the past, I think this is the past 30 days of scans, it actually only ended up being about 1,300 servers that were out there. This tends to vary as well a little bit, but there's a huge amount of IP address for use, and even if you go back to the Conti leaks, several of the IP addresses that they were using for Cobalt Strike servers, they're still Cobalt Strike servers, it's just not them using it anymore. Huge amount in China as well, and US IP space. Right. So as I mentioned, the actual payload return from these scans is a ton of fun and tells me so many little details about the people using it. So if you've never used Cobalt Strike, this is what the interface looks like when you're creating a new listener to receive inbound infections. You work through the interface on the right. And there's a couple settings that you can put in. You can say, here's the C2 address, here's the way I want you to communicate. There's not a lot of things they can set. But when you actually tear the beacon sample up, there's so much more. And huge shout out also to S1 because they have the best tool on GitHub right now for extracting COBA configs. So big shouts on that one because that's the one I'm using. But when looking at the two of these, between the listener and the extracted config, there's numerous other things that are within each copy of Cobalt Strike that are the copies of Beacon that are deployed that actors don't have control over. Things like the watermarks, which is tied to your license, the public key, which is tied to the instance, and then there's also minor settings that tie into how an attack is conducted, things like where the sample is going to spawn to, and all of these little things, when looked at in mass, start to tell some really interesting stories. And if you're using some of the customizable, malleable profiles, even those leave a fingerprint. And even if you're using the open source tools for obfuscating your C2, it still is telling me that you're obfuscating it and still puts you into a narrow bucket. And so when I was talking to it before when Brunch started, with the 3 points of needing to sort of slice out a large data set to get down to when you have a large data set, like all of the Cobalt Strike configs across the planet, as you ask questions like, okay, I know this actor tends to have Cobalt Strike deploy to this process, that immediately slices that large data set into a smaller one. Then another question of, we also know they use this watermark, narrows it down further. So, when we start to take and look at these things in aggregate, because what we're looking at now is all of the watermarks for samples, and these are tied to the license keys of the purchasers of these things, we can make some fun assessments and we can learn some unique things. Does this have a laser pointer? Maybe. Nope, I'm not going to try any further. But that big red box is a watermark of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, I think, at the end. I can't see that far out of my glasses. That's not a legitimate watermark. And proportionally, that makes up the largest portion of Cobalt Strike servers on the planet are pirated copies. And then none being the second one, also not a legitimate watermark, followed by, 10,000, 100,000? Again, not legitimate. That far right, where everything gets really convoluted, those are legitimate copies, those are pen testers. Go forth and do whatever pen testers do. But then even further, as we looking at in aggregate at the where Cobalt Strike spawns, even things like customized user agents, each of which telling us little bits. The ones that are at the very top end, where it's the bulk used and the most common ones, we don't need to care about that, because when we're trying to find smaller clusters, what we want to find are the ones that have 4 or 5 instances, 2 or 3. Those smaller numbers tend to be where you find the individual settings that are unique to various groups. So Conti did this really well, and so for folks who are not following the Conti ransomware group or the ghost that was Conti, back in late February, early March, all of their internal comms system, sorry, I have a problem with generalizations, I don't like them. A portion of their comms were publicly leaked by Conti leaks and Trick leaks. I've gone back and reread parts of this probably once a week since that happened. And it has been fantastic and a ton of fun, and I couldn't be more excited. And I'm really hoping for the Yalashanda leaks to go to do more. So during a conversation between Green and Cactus, he provided a whole bunch of IP addresses and domains of things they were using, one of which being this 4577.189.106 address. When I went back through the scan data, turns out that I had hit this server once and pulled out the config. And when looking at it as well, the URI path where it's being configured to beacon into, generic in that top 90th percentile of things, where it's spawning to, again, top 90th percentile type range. Watermark, I think, was none for this one, but it was also non-distinct. So as much as they, what sets this apart and is interesting is they consistently kept things as close to the defaults as possible, and it resulted in them not standing out. It also, though, means they're not lucky enough to, not lucky is the wrong word there, they're also not taking advantage of any sort of distinctive things to try and obfuscate themselves, which is where things like cryptors become really important to differentiate. Additionally, and one of the kind of mysteries that I'm playing with a little bit more, I don't know what this timer is ticking for, but typically, when we think about command and control infrastructure, it's especially with Cobalt Strike. There's the staging server, which usually when a payload's deployed, they connect right back to the same server. Very duck, consistent. One of the weird mysteries I've been tracking on lately a bit more is when they don't. So the goose to this is when you have one server in, say, Russia, one server in the US, and instead of the infections being deployed from them, instead of them connecting back to those servers, they connect somewhere else. And it creates this unique kind of proxy setup for their attacks. There's a big old cluster that if anybody wants to dive into, I'm happy to provide all of the decoded configuration files and details that I have. But from looking at it, and it was super fun trying to make this chart, you can see this sort of like broad swath of different addresses that are serving the actual Cobalt Strike payloads, but they're connecting into some broader, more distinctive control infrastructure. So let's get focused. And big shout out to Glire also for explaining info stealers at the beginning of the talk today, because that's what we're about to dive into. And I did not have in my slides a accurate and proper description of them. So I was looking at one a couple days ago called Acrid Rain. The admin was kind enough to offer me a trial, at least to look at the panel, and really interesting because I was like, okay, you know, what's unique about this page? Are there any things in this page that I can distinctly try and scan for? Because you're visiting the IP address, I think it was like a 45 dot something IP address, no subpath, just hitting the root page. Shout out as well to Shieldio for including his jabber. So kickoff scan, look for everything that responds on port 80 and contains Shieldio at secure.biz, which is their jabber. Boom. Immediately identify all of the servers that are running this panel. So these are where people and stolen credentials are being sent. Yeah, only 2 in this case. But like once more with feeling. And this gets really important, and I want to caveat just as one back comment. When we've talked today about actors being able to scale, C2 infrastructure being easily disposable, and being able to blast out hundreds of thousand phishing messages a day, the way to counter it without a more apt strategy is we need to learn to scale too. And so through things like scanning, we can do that. So, and I'm gonna try really hard to say this right because I had to look it up last night as well. Rhodomonthus stealer was another one that was posted about on XSS. Really glad I pulled off my forum name there. But another one of these stealers that's come onto the market. They're fairly commodity. They grab credentials, they post them back up to a server. Found a sample on VirusTotal, which is where I get most of my intel. Oh, their panel's also really fantastic too. And as well, in terms of being able to deploy second stage payloads, they have a JavaScript thing to do that as well, which is fun. When the malware actually checks in, it uses a pseudo-randomized path, and I saw the cross-site request forgery token and the cookie value, and I was immediately like, oh, this is way too much work to go forward. But when I was looking at the documentation for the panel, it uses a consistent path, /admin/console/index. And when we swipe for that, we end up with quite a few more. And this gets really important because if you then take those addresses of all the control servers, push them out to customers, it at least provides enough time to be able to start remediating the infections before the data gets transmitted to threat actors. And where I'm going with a lot of this scanning as well is doing these types of identification at scale constantly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, at insane speeds. So if you would like a copy of the data and the output, hit me up. Thank you.